In the garage of Dr. Frank Conrad, on November 2nd, 1920, the first scheduled pre-advertised radio program in the United States went on the air. Station KDKA was broadcasting returns of the presidential race on the evening of Election Day. From a humble beginning in a Pittsburgh garage to the sumptuous studios of the national radio networks in New York, Chicago, and Hollywood, these are the years we refer to as the golden age of radio.
Here's the Manhattan merry-go-round that brings you the bright side of life, that whirls you in music to all the big night spots of New York town, to hear the top songs of the week sung so clearly you can understand every word and sing them yourself.
Al Kemp on the air for Griffin.
It's time to shine. Shine your shoes and
Tony Home Permanent presents...
This is Nora Drake.
The Golden Age of Radio is brought to you by Burritt Mutual Savings Bank, serving Central Connecticut since 1889. We'll join Dick Bertel, Ed Corcoran, and their special guest in just a moment. And now the host of the Golden Age of Radio, Dick Bertel.
Good evening, and with me once again is radio collector Ed Corcoran. Ed, we have a special guest tonight, don't we?
We sure do, Dick. A star of the movies, television, and as we will find out in a few minutes, a big star on radio, too, Dick. Why don't you tell everybody who it is?
Well, of course, we're talking about Vincent Price. Vincent, it's a pleasure to welcome you to the Golden Age of Radio.
Thank you, Dick. I feel like I'm back home.
That's the reason that you're on this program, because I knew that you were coming to Hartford, and naturally we thought of asking you to appear on the program, but usually someone whose motion picture career, whose theater career has perhaps overshadowed a radio career would be hesitant to talk about radio, but not you.
No, I still think radio is probably the greatest entertainment medium ever invented. It made the audience work. And I think television audiences don't have to work, and that's why they fall asleep half of the time.
Well, you worked in radio for a long time, right up until, I guess, the Hollywood studios closed in the early 60s.
Yes.
As a matter of fact, you've just returned from England, where you are filming a motion picture, but you did some radio work there.
Yes, they call me up from the BBC. You know, radio in England is still enormous, and it always will be, because people love radio over there. And they do some superb dramas and music and documentary programs, really marvelous. And they asked me if I'd come and do a storytelling show of great short stories. Stories that have to do with the macabre, with the unusual, with the strange.
We have received the impression in doing this series, Vincent, that some of the motion picture and theater actors look down on radio and radio actors. In fact, it was a very definite impression that we have received from some actors.
Really? Man, no. you have come to the wrong fellow. If you want me to hear that. You know, I go out every year on a lecture tour all over the country and have for 15 years, and I've lectured in over 200 colleges and universities around the country, and I'm always getting asked by young actors, how do you start in the business? You know, what is the best training you can have? Well, we don't have the marvelous repertory companies that England has, and we don't have state theater as some other countries have. So there is really no place for the young actor to go. But in the colleges is always a radio and television department. And my advice to the young actor always is get on radio. Do as many dramas as you possibly can on radio, on your local show. And I know that some of the colleges I've been to have really started to begin to do some of the great radio dramas and to write new material for themselves. Because it imposes on the actor the necessity to create everything, to create the sets, to create the costumes, to create the expressions, to create everything. And I think one of the great drawbacks of television is that so much of it is just sort of visualized radio shows, where they ought to really write television shows. And, they run out of material. It's a big monster. But radio had superb writers, absolute extraordinary writers, and I don't think television has that all the time.
Well, you seem to have this perception for radio's gift, radio's ability to create moods, to create sets, because as a young actor in New York, I believe, you decided to work at least anonymously in radio.
Well, I was doing a play, and my first play in New York was a big hit. It was one of those extraordinary breaks that you get or you don't get, and it was a play opposite Helen Hayes, and it ran for 3 years. And there was no chance of sort of going out and doing other plays. I would go out in the summer. We'd lay off for a month, and I'd go do summer stock in Skowhegan, Maine, or all around here. And that was experience, but I felt that the one experience that I really could afford and get in New York was to work on soap operas. And marvelous things like John's Other Wife, extraordinary soap opera stories. And I would go work without a name, without anything, because I was not part of the radio group, but I could get jobs because I was in a hit play. And I would take advantage of that. And I worked on radio every single week, and maybe would do 5 or 6 shows a week, playing in these different kinds of radio dramas. And I learned my business, how you really create a part orally. And it was exciting and wonderful experience.
We were talking, Vincent, before going on the air about some of the programs in which you appeared. You have some of these shows in your own collection, but one series in which you starred for some 4 years was The Saint.
Yeah.
And I don't believe you've heard that series in 25 years.
I really haven't. And there are lots of people around the country collecting old radio shows and putting them on tape and really bringing them up in sound and doing a marvelous job. And I've been able to collect about, I think I must have done well over 2,000 radio shows in my life. And I don't have very many of them because it cost a lot of money to have them put on record, and you didn't get paid very much in radio. So unless it was a very special show, you didn't order it taken off the air.
Of course, this takes us back to the days before tape, doesn't it, Ed? When actors, in order to hear themselves, would have to hire an outside recording studio.
Oh, yes, and it was very expensive. I mean, if I had wanted The Saint taken off, it would have cost me about $60. And it was a lot of money in those days, because you weren't paid that much. I did have taken off some of them. Most of the Lux Radio Theater, which was all the actors gave their services to Lux Radio Theater because it was then given to the Motion Picture Home and Motion Picture Relief. And they always gave us the recordings of those, and I have all the ones I did with Betty Davis and Herbert Marshall, and really superb actors, great memories they are.
Vincent Price doesn't have to go any farther to hear The Saint, does he?
No, we have a very
Can't believe it.
opening theme, the commercials, the whole bit, Dick. And it's really a great show, and I think the theme itself should turn back the clock a few years.
The Adventures of the Saint, starring Vincent Price. The Saint, based on characters created by Leslie Charteris and known to millions from books, magazines, and motion pictures. The Robin Hood of modern crime now comes transcribed to radio, starring Hollywood's brilliant and talented actor Vincent Price as The Saint.
Well, of course, you appeared in so many of the anthologies, Lux Radio Theater, of course, because you were in so many of the movies. But what were some of the other programs that our radio audience might remember, Ed?
Well, there was the Lady Esther Screen Guild Players and the Hollywood Star Time and of course Suspense and shows like that.
On one of these shows like Hollywood Star Time, when would you begin rehearsal for a program?
It was a very long rehearsal period, and you really worked. You worked, maybe from 10 in the morning right straight through until you did the show maybe at 9 o'clock at night. And it was long hours of work. The extraordinary thing was the care that went into radio shows. There was a kind of perfection about the radio actor that was extraordinary. It was a very small group of people, and I always felt myself enormously privileged that I was able to join that group, because they didn't take everybody in by a long shot.
Well, we've learned that.
If you liked radio as much as I did, you depended on these people. People like Lorene Tuttle and Hans Conried, and these people who could do anything. They really could do anything. I mean, suddenly if somebody got sick who was playing a Greek, you'd say, well, Hans, how about it? And he was a Greek in 2 seconds, or he was Russian, or whatever you wanted to do.
Tell the story about Lorene Tuttle.
It really is extraordinary. And you mentioned earlier today when we were talking about that she was famous for having done so many parts on one show. It may have been this show. 20th Century Fox, when I was under contract as a movie actor to them, I had written in my contract that I wanted the freedom to do radio. Now, there was no television at that time. And they were very sticky about it. They were really kind of angry that I should want this. And I said, I feel radio is my training ground, and that's where I want to work. But they let me do it. And so, of all the contract players, I was the only one who was allowed to do it. Anytime I wanted to do it, and it didn't interfere with their films. Well, then they finally had their own radio show on the air, and I can't remember what it was called. I think Hedda Hopper was the MC.
Yeah, there was one called 20th Century Presents or something like that.
That's what it was. And we did a lot of pictures. I did The Lodger and, different things like this. Anyway, there was one show where they had 2 little starlets, little pretty girls who were very sweet and who were up-and-coming stars. And they were on the show, and then there was one of their character women on the show, and none of them could do radio, because radio is not just getting up and reading. It is acting, And they couldn't do it. And Lorene was playing the mother on it. So after about 2 days of rehearsal, they suddenly told one of the little starlets that she would have to go, so Lorene took that part. Then about another day, and they got rid of the next little starlet, and Lorene took her part. And it ended up with Lorene playing, I think, 5 or 6 different parts.
Incredible.
And it ended up, Lorene was a great friend of mine, and she had been the leading lady on The Saint for a long, long time with me. It ended up with my being absolutely hysterical, because she was playing a woman 80, a woman 50, a woman 40, a child 13. Just any part that came up. And it was only Lorene and myself in a show that should have been 7 people. And I finally had to work on a separate mic because I couldn't look at her. Because she changed the whole characterization. Absolutely brilliant she was. Brilliant.
You're listening to the Golden Age of Radio with Dick Bertel and the recordings of Ed Corcoran. Brought to you by Burritt Mutual Savings Bank, serving Central Connecticut since 1889. And by WTIC, Hartford, Connecticut.
You mentioned the Lodger in our conversation a few minutes ago, and I see that on Hollywood Star Time, Ed, Vincent Price appeared as in both The Lodger and Hangover Square, and I'm thinking back to the fact that you did not appear in either film.
No. It was Laird Cregar. I did Laird's first film with him, which was a thing called The Hudson's Bay was the name of it. And Laird and I became very great friends, and then he died, very young. I think he was only 31 or something. And he had done The Lodger, and he had done Hangover Square. And after he died, I think that's when they did these shows on the air. So I got to play the parts. And it was an extraordinary feeling playing a part that was that much identified with that man.
That started off a career of the macabre. Haven't you kind of gone in that direction ever since? Not all the time, but many roles are geared that way.
Yeah, sort of. Either that or comedy. I love comedy. And it's very easy to turn the macabre into comedy.
That's right.
It really is. I think perhaps if those films that I have done that have been horror films have been successful, it's because I have a little bit of tongue-in-cheek. Because I think I've got to find them as funny as the audience does sometimes.
Our guest is Vincent Price, and we're talking about Vincent's radio career, which goes back, I guess, to the 30s, would you say, Vincent?
Yes, well into the 30s.
When you were doing those soap operas on an anonymous basis in New York.
And I did the Rudy Valet show and the first show Edgar Bergen was ever on with Charlie.
Oh, really?
Oh, it was tremendous because you fell in love with this dummy, and when he'd set him down, he was something dead sitting there, It was really frightening because this thing came to life. He was brilliant, Edgar. I got to tell you a marvelous radio story. For years and years, we always listened to Jack Benny. Who didn't? Really the greatest, I think, single performer on radio that ever was. I mean, just absolutely brilliant. He could take 10 minutes of dead air and make you fall on your face laughing. And if you remember, Ronald Coleman was always the next-door neighbor of the Bennies. Mm-hmm. And the Bennies, who were so chintzy and cheap and, never had enough of anything, were always going over to the Colemans to borrow a cup of sugar or egg or something. So anyway, lap dissolve a few years. This shows you how much in love with radio I was. I did a film with Ronald Coleman, and he and his wife asked my wife and myself over to dinner. And we knew where Jack Benny lived. We'd always known where Jack Benny lives, one of the sort of landmarks of Hollywood. So we got in the car, all dressed up, went down, went next door to Jack Benny. Went up to the front door, next door to Jack Benny, rang the bell and said, Mr. and Mrs. Coleman are expecting us, because they didn't live there at all. Not at all, nor did we know where the hell they lived. And we finally had to call the Screen Actors Guild to find out where the Colemans lived. I always took it for granted they lived next door to Jack Benny, And in his basement was a vault with all those chains around it. Oh, marvelous, man. Oh, dear.
Our guest tonight is Vincent Price on the Golden Age of Radio. Vincent, you did work in the Golden Age. I'm delighted to learn that you are contemplating a series for the BBC in radio. You're one of the very few people that we've been able to interview on this program who was considering furthering his radio career.
Yeah, I love it. I really love it. And I really think that the commercial people, whoever they are, who say whether we work or don't work, are making a big mistake. California, where you drive enormous distances, I have that radio on all the time. And I'd like to hear something good.
You were talking about Lux Radio Theater, and this was probably the biggest radio dramatic production on the air, would you say?
Yes, it was really extraordinary. Cecil B. DeMille was the host, and William Keighley and different people, very distinguished directors. And the fact that all of the money went to the Actors Fund was very impressive. Besides, I suppose it had one of the biggest listening audiences of all time. And these dramas were rehearsed like plays. You rehearsed a full week. And I think some of the most exciting ones I did were The Letter with Betty Davis and Herbert Marshall. And that was kind of an extraordinary story because Betty, being as volatile a lady as she is and a wiggler, and wiggling was something you weren't meant to do in radio because you had to keep your distance from that mic. They finally built an iron circle around the mic to keep Betty's distance away from it because she'd fall in love with it, and she'd get up to it, and it goes pop and hiss and all of the things that you do when you get too close to a mic, which I'm probably doing right now.
Did you ever find that any of your colleagues from the motion picture screen were frightened of radio?
Terrified of it. Most of the stars at Fox, and I mean the great stars like Tyrone Power and people like that, when Fox had its own show, there were so few of them who knew how to work on radio. They didn't know how to read. They couldn't sustain it. They couldn't give it a variety. And it had to have a variety and a tremendous excitement to it. Even if it was a very calm performance, it had to have an inner excitement.
I think if I were to single out one show, one performance, in which I best remember Vincent Price on the radio, that would have to be from the Suspense series, Three Skeleton Key.
Oh, yeah. Brilliant show. The young fellow who wrote it, I challenged him to write it. He was sort of trying to get into movies, and his name was James Poe, and he's since won about 5 Academy Awards. And he couldn't really get started. He couldn't get off the ground. He and his wife were great friends of ours. And I said, why don't you write me a radio show? He said, I don't know how to write for radio. And I said, what do you mean you don't know how to write for radio? You write. You create visual effects. You do, you know. So he searched around. He found this short story, and he adapted it to radio. And it really made his reputation, this story, because it became one of the great radio shows ever done.
I would say one of the 3 great radio shows.
Yeah, we were talking about that before we went on the air, Dick. I think it was Sorry Wrong Number,
Agnes,
Lion versus the Ants,
yeah,
and Three Skeleton Key.
Yes.
This is on a Suspense. These were the 3 top shows
I
of all
think so
time.
Too. I think so too.
Yeah, it never was made into a film or a TV show.
No,
I
it should be.
couldn't. It would be very difficult. I think again, the imagination is even better than seeing it.
Where are you going to get that many trained rats? Not except in New York, of course.
This is the Suspense show, and the scene is a lighthouse way out in the dregs of the Pacific. Very isolated lighthouse, and there are 3 men in there, and they're just waiting for something to happen, and something really does happen very shortly.
Wow.
Suspense. And the producer of radio's outstanding theater of thrills, the master of mystery and adventure, William N. Robeson.
Among the great classics of radio drama, none is more memorable than Three Skeleton Key, although few who have heard it would remember it by that title. To them, it is simply that story about the rats. And that it is, an unforgettable experience in horror. We repeat it now because we can't help ourselves. We like to scare as well as you like to be scared. Listen then as Vincent Price stars in Three Skeleton Key.
And now, Three Skeleton Key, starring Vincent Price. A tale well calculated to keep you in suspense.
Try and picture this place. A gray tapering cylinder welded by iron rods and concrete to the key itself. A bare black rock 150 feet long, maybe 40 wide. That's at low tide. At high tide, just the light rising 110 feet straight up out of the ocean. And all about it, the churning water, gray-green, scum-dappled, warm as soup, and swarming with gigantic bat-like devilfish, great violet schools of Portuguese man-o'-war, and, yes, sharks, the big ones, 15-footers. And as if this wasn't enough, there was a hot, dank, rotten-smelling wind that came at us day and night off the jungle swamps of the mainland. A wind that smelled like death. Set in the base of the light is a watertight bronze door. And in you go, and up, round and round. Over the light storeroom is the food storeroom, and over the food storeroom is the bunk room, where the 3 of us slept. And over the bunk room is the living and cooking room, and over the living and cooking room is the light. She was a beauty, balanced like a ballerina on the glistening steel axle of her rotary mechanism. My companions in the light were an odd and opposite pair. Big Louie, the head man who hardly ever talked, and Auguste, who never stopped. But it wasn't a bad life. especially at night when the others were snoring in their sacks 2 levels down. Usually there was nothing to see across the starlit water, for most ships knew better than to come close to 3 Skeleton Key. But one night, gazing out across the phosphorescent combers, I noticed something show for a second in the revolving light. Something far off. A 3-master. A big one. About half a mile off and coming down out of the north-northwest, coming straight for us. I went over to the gallery door and yelled, "Louis! Louis!
What is it?
Ship headed for the reef!"
We'll be right out.
I had the glasses out now. I couldn't read her name, but I could see her quite plainly. All sails set, the foam creaming away under her bow, her beautiful lines, but why didn't she turn? Every time our light turned, it hit her with the glare of day.
A ship? Where?
Northwest. The light will touch her in a moment.
Can't they see?
Look at her. She just keeps coming on.
Oh, the squareheads.
What is it? What is it?
Watch northwest, August.
Huh? Ah, I know what it is. The Dutchman. The Flying Dutchman. She is derelict. That's it.
Derelict?
Abandoned. Crew left her for some reason or other, but instead of sinking, she's gone on, running before every wind.
She'll not run long. Not with these reefs to break her up.
Beautiful ship. Now, why would men leave a beautiful ship like that?
Impossible. Absolutely impossible.
What?
Here, take my glasses. They're stronger than yours.
All right. What is it you're... Rose in my throat. The decks were swarming with a dark brown carpet that looked like a gigantic fungus, but undulating, and on the masts and yards were hundreds, no, thousands, no, I don't know, an inestimable number of tremendous rats. There, the 3 of us frozen in terror, peering through our binoculars as the rat-covered ship gracefully, relentlessly bore down upon the quay, until at last, with a horrible certainty, splintering and grinding upon the rocks, she ran aground.
Look, the rats on the water, like a carpet.
They're swimming.
Oh, sure, they're swimming. Those are ship's rats.
But they're swimming for the rocks.
The door, below, it's open.
Come on!
And down we went, racing down the stone stairs, taking them 3 and 4 at a time. Scared? You bet we were scared.
Suppose you get the windows, maybe they can climb. We don't know.
All right, Chief, but hurry, hurry.
You see them?
No. Yes, I do. We're up at the other end of the rock.
Look at them! Millions! And they smell us! Here they come! Close the door!
I can't, it's stuck.
Here, let me...
Oh, move, you heave! Made it.
Oh, that was close.
One got in.
What?
Look, there.
Get in!
Watch it, he did. Kick him.
Brute!
He was as big as a tomcat, bigger, and his eyes were wild and red, his teeth long and sharp and yellow. He went for us, starving, ravenous, and we fought him, fought that one rat all over the room. It was, oh, believe me, I do not exaggerate, it was like fighting a panther. I got him. As we ran up the winding staircase, we passed the tiny windows of the various levels, and every one was covered with a thick, wriggling, screaming curtain of brown fur. The air of the gallery was thick and fetid with the stink of them. The light was dim, brown, filtered through the crawling mass that swarmed over the glass all about us. We could not see the sky, nothing but them. Their red eyes, their claws, their wriggling, hairy snouts, and their teeth.
What can we do? What can we do, Chief?
Take it easy, Auguste. Take it easy.
Oh, I can't. I just can't.
It won't do any good. Won't do any good to stand here and shake.
Go away. Go away. Do you hear me? Go away.
They won't go away. Not until the...
Oh, finish it, Chief. Not until what?
Not until they've been fed.
All day long, we sat there in silent horror, watching the writhing mass trying to reach us through the glass, and then at last it began to get dark. One side of the room was lit a soft, filtered red. Sunset through the rats. Very pretty. I set the wicks, checked my fuel, and then lit the lamp. It caught them, lit them in their gigantic, wriggling web of pale, hairless bellies, twitching red tails, bright eyes. And then I started the rotary motor. The light drove them mad. As she swung slowly and smoothly about, she blinded them in the fierce, stabbing bar of light, moving continually about, ever turning, ever touching, ever moving around and around, and they twitching and shuddering, eyes flaming when they were struck by the light, blinking and twinkling like the stars of hell. Make the most of any situation to endure it. And we found a way to entertain ourselves by teasing the rats. Sounds crazy, horrible? It was fun. We would get right up against the glass and make faces at them. It drove them crazy. They would scratch away trying to get at our eyes. Louis was even cuter about it. He'd pull a piece of bread out of his pocket and press it against the glass. The rats would scramble into a solid ball, biting each other, clustering like grapes. From time to time, a whole lot of them would slip and fall the 110 feet to the surf below.
Look! Look at the sharks.
They're eating them.
The sharks are our friends. Oh, here, I'll get another bunch together. Here, little beauties. Yeah, that's it. Pile up. Kill each other. There they go.
Auguste joined in, too. Very ingenious, Auguste. He learned that if he spread-eagled himself against the glass, they'd bunch and bundle against his figure. Then he'd leap back.
Look! My portrait in rats!
I went off watch about midnight, and I was just falling asleep when I became conscious of a new sound. I couldn't figure it at first, so I got up, lit the lamp, and went to the window. Even as I looked at it, I saw one of the panes begin to sag in. They were eating the wood away. Louis, come quick. They found a way in. I held the glass with my hand. And now they were all going crazy, and assured of the success of this maneuver, they were nibbling away at the frame. Louis ran below and then returned with a large sheet of tin. We spread it against the window and hammered it into place. Even as we did so, we felt the heavy bodies thudding against the other side as the window gave way.
That ought to hold.
Yeah.
If it doesn't, we're done for.
Rats can't eat tin.
No. What was that?
I don't know.
Well, that came from below.
The storeroom window.
They're in. They're swarming up the stairs.
Drop the trap door.
Right.
Two of them got in.
Huh? Go after them.
We didn't have to go after them. They came at us. I leaped to one side and grabbed a marlin spike, swung and smashed one in midair.
No!
I whirled to see Louis with the other. It had ripped his hand open, and the blood was pouring all over the place. He held his hand aloft and kicked at the snarl trap. I stepped ready, swung, and got it.
My hand. He got my hand.
That's both of them, Louis. I'll get you something to tie that up.
Bleeding. Look at it. My blood. I'm bleeding.
Don't worry about it, Louis. Now, look. I'll wind this kerchief about it. It'll be okay. There. Now, it's not bad, just the flesh. Then I became conscious of a new sound. They were gnawing their way through the wooden trapdoor. I watched the planks, fascinated, and even as I did, it began to give way. A bristling, whiskery snout showed through.
The gallery. The trapdoor in the gallery. It's steel.
Good. Come on. We made it. We lay across the trap, exhausted, while below us the rats took over the entire tower. I could hear them howling and fighting over our food supply, our water, our leather, and all about us the others screamed and glared in at us, swaying in a tangled mass, hypnotized by the ever-turning light. By morning, the air in the little room was horrible. Until now, we'd been getting air from the tower below. Now that was sealed off. And so was all our food and water. We lay exhausted, panting, waiting, and the hours crawled on. I was almost dozing from fatigue when I heard something that brought me to my feet.
Would you like to come in, my beauties? Would you? I hold the powers of life and death, and I can let you in, you know.
Auguste was standing by the glass, and in one hand he held a big wrench. He was tapping the glass gently, not quite hard enough to break it. I eased myself to my feet and slowly, very slowly, tiptoed toward him.
All I have to do is tap just a little harder, and
So there I was, a lunatic and a coward for company, and all about watching our little drama, The Rats. The following day we lay, thirst-tormented, starving, waiting, and the following night I again tended the light. But the small supply of spare wicking we kept in the gallery had become exhausted, and quite suddenly at about midnight, the light went out. There was nothing I could do. Wicks were stored 3 levels below. Nothing I could do, nothing. From time to time I'd strike a match to see the clock. And when I did, it lit up the million red eyes about us. All about us, watching, waiting. Below it had grown quiet. They'd cleaned us out, and now they, too, were waiting. All waiting. And then the rats, quite suddenly, were silent. And then I heard it. And then I saw the sky and the stars. The rats were gone. I went to the glass. Out there on the water, a small freighter, a banana boat, came softly and innocently at us. The light was out. They didn't know. I wanted to open the windows, to call out to them, to warn them somehow, but I was afraid. What if the rats were hiding from me, tricking me? And so I waited. She grounded very softly on a reef not 200 yards from the quay. Grounded so gently that the man playing the cornet, was he a passenger, a crewman off watch, didn't even stop playing. They tried washing her back off. I could have told them to save their fuel. The tide was rising, would have floated her free. And I waited. That's all. That's the story. The sun came up and there wasn't a rat on the whole quay. Every last one of that terrible army had deserted us, gone back to sea on their new ship. Auguste, insane asylum, he never recovered. And Louis, they took him into Cayenne, where he died of blood poisoning from his bite. Life on Three Skeleton Key isn't bad these days, but sometimes when I see a strange vessel approaching, I get a little nervous. Can you blame me? Somewhere on the seas, there's a little banana boat without a crew. That is, without a human crew.
Suspense, in which Vincent Price starred in William N. Robeson's production of Three Skeleton Key, written by George Tudus and adapted for Suspense by James Poe.
Vincent Price, I can't tell you how much we've enjoyed getting together with you on the golden age of radio and learning how much you do love radio.
I really love it. When we finally did the last Suspense show in Hollywood. And it was all the people that you know who've been on every show you've ever heard from Hollywood in the old days. And we were all sitting around, and finally Virginia Gregg, who was one of the great ladies of radio, and she looked around, she said, "Isn't it awful?" She said, "Isn't it awful?" She said, "Oh, God, if only television was going out and radio was coming in." And it is true, too. We all felt that.
Vincent Price, thank you so much for being with us. This is Dick Bertel.
And this is Ed Corcoran.
Good night. The Golden Age of Radio with Dick Bertel and the recordings of Ed Corcoran is brought to you by WTIC and by Burritt Mutual Savings Bank, serving Central Connecticut since 1889. With engineering and technical assistance by Bob Shirago, The Golden Age of Radio is produced by Brian Hartnett. This is Al Tersey.